Hi, this is Jeff Minter with Automotive Research and Design, and I'm here today with a hybrid vehicle tech tip from P10. If you're going to be working on hybrid vehicles, or if you already have been working on hybrid vehicles, there are a few basic tools that you're going to need to invest in. Obviously, one of those is going to be a diagnostic scan tool that can access the control modules, but you're also going to need some other things like personal protective equipment, such as Class 0 gloves, to make it safe to work on the high voltage system. You also need a Category 3 digital volt ohm meter, and you're going to need an insulation tester. The insulation tester is what we're going to focus on today during this tech tip. So you might be wondering, what does an insulation tester do? An insulation tester generally serves a couple of different purposes. The first purpose is that it works as a Category 3 digital volt ohm meter. The second function is that it will actually work as a way to test the insulation that separates the high voltage system or the high voltage components from the vehicle chassis. If you start looking around for an insulation tester, you'll find out very quickly that there's a wide variety of different options available from a wide variety of different manufacturers. You'll also realize just as quickly that the price on these units can vary quite a bit. On the low end, you'll see units for somewhere in the $100 range, maybe even sub $100 in some cases, and on the high end, somewhere up around $700, maybe even $800 isn't uncommon to see. We're going to look at a few of the ones that we've used over the years that we know work well on hybrid and electric vehicles as part of the diagnostics process. The two insulation testers that we use on a regular basis are the Fluke 1587 and the X-Tech MG300. The first one we'll look at is the Fluke 1587, as that's probably the product line that you're more familiar with. The Fluke 1587 also happens to be the one that is currently recommended by most of the automotive manufacturers. The price point for the Fluke product is somewhere in the neighborhood of $700, and it serves as a full functional Category 3 digital volt ohm meter, as well as an insulation tester with a range all the way from 50 volts up to 1000 volts, which means it will cover all of the vehicles currently being produced in the light duty market. This unit also has a unique feature in the fact that it has a remote actuation button on the test lead for the insulation test, which allows you to actuate the test from the test lead rather than having to go back and actually test it on the unit itself. The MG300 is made by X-Tech, which is a company you may not be as familiar with. X-Tech is actually owned by a company called FLIR Systems, which is more commonly known for its thermal imaging cameras. This unit has a lower price point of around $430, still a very full functional Category 3 digital volt ohm meter, and it still has a range of the insulation test from 125 volts up to 1000 volts, which means it still works on all of the vehicles currently in production as well. The one thing that this is lacking, which is really more of a convenience feature, is simply that remote actuation button on the test lead. So you will have to go back and apply the test button right on the tester itself versus the Fluke product where you can actuate it from the end of the test lead. So how does an insulation tester work? Well, if you've ever used an ohm meter, then you're already fairly familiar with the operation of an insulation tester, as they work very similarly. This will take the available voltage from the insulation tester, which is generally supplied by AA batteries, and it will step it up to whatever voltage you've programmed the tester to. Typically in the light-duty automotive market right now, we're seeing those at 250 volts and 500 volt test ranges that are needed for various components on different vehicle makes and models. Once we hook this up to the car, then we'll hook one lead to the high voltage system that we need to test, or the high voltage component that we need to test, and the other lead to the vehicle chassis, and press the test button, or in the Fluke's case we can use the remote actuation button on the lead. Once we apply that voltage, the meter will read the resistance between the high voltage component and the vehicle chassis, and then it will display that reading in ohms on the meter screen. We'll then have to reference the service information to determine if the reading that we obtained is high enough to pass the minimum required resistance between the high voltage component and the vehicle chassis. So what components can you test with this tester? Well, the reality is this is a pinpoint test, which means it's not vehicle specific and it's not component specific. This will work on virtually any high voltage component on any of the vehicles currently being made, as long as it doesn't require a test voltage that's higher than what your insulation tester would be capable of producing. That means we can use it to test things like a power inverter, we can use it for the high voltage battery cables, electric machines, which are more commonly referred to as motors and generators, the high voltage battery, and even the high voltage electric AC compressor, as well as any other components that may be on the high voltage system that need to be separated from the high voltage to the chassis, such as things like the DC to DC converter. Well, this tester is very flexible in the fact that it can test numerous different components on virtually every hybrid vehicle out there. It does still have limitations like any other piece of test equipment. Unfortunately, based on the type of test that this runs, it's generally only going to be able to find gross failures, and those gross failures have to be occurring while the vehicle is in your bay, or you won't be able to find the problem. The reason for that really has to do with how the test is run and how the current has to find its path. We'll look at these limitations as well as how to utilize this test equipment as part of a diagnostic process in future segments from P10. Thank you for watching this tech tip brought to you by P10. Hopefully you'll join us for future segments where we'll go over more information on installation testers as well as numerous other technical topics related to hybrid vehicle diagnostics and repair.